Without further ado, man, let's try and make sense of the madness of last night's rankings and unpack hotel playoff. So again, if you're new, hotel playoff goes like this. Got the penthouse, teams we feel great about. Teams that in discussion for this week's hotel playoff, I would say are more or less locks. You have teams in the lobby that I would say are not yet locks. You should feel really good about your chances. Those teams, in my mind, control their own destiny, all right? More on that in a second. Teams in the need a reservation category are teams that have a chance now. Your Clemsons of the world, your Alabamas of the world, but need a little help to find their way in. And then you got the G5 party, and that is a 3-team hangout right now. It's a good time, good kickback, and we'll give you that conversation here as we move forward. But let's start in the penthouse, man. Again, these are the teams that I would classify as your college football playoff locks. Who's in the penthouse? You got Oregon, you got Ohio State. I don't think we need to spend too much time talking about either of those teams. We saw what Ohio State did to Indiana. We've seen what Oregon's done all year long. Ohio State clinches a spot in the Big Ten championship game with a win this weekend over Michigan. They are darn near 3-touchdown favorites. Everyone expects them to handle business in Columbus. The curious part about this now, as we move forward into the college football playoff seeding discussion, if you watch last night's rankings, look at that 12 seed, like, hang on, that's actually the number 16 ranked team in the country. That's actually the Big 12 champ. And a multi-loss Arizona State, potentially now, if ASU does win the conference. Okay, so I mean, it's like, if you were to draw straws as to who would be or if you were to draft opponents, rather, I think ASU would be the first one off the board in terms of teams you could take in the first round of the college football playoff. No disrespect to the Sun Devils. In the second round, who do you play? The G5 rep. So while the winner of the Big Ten championship more likely than not will get the first seed in the college football playoff, that 5th seed may be the money spot. I'd much rather play one of those schools, just quite frankly, more than I would rather play a Tennessee or a Georgia, which is who on paper right now, if the playoff started tomorrow, who the number 1 seeded Oregon Ducks would draw in their first playoff game after their bye. So just keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on that whole conversation. If you lose the Big Ten championship game, if we do get Oregon-Ohio State in the rematch, which I expect us to get, the loser isn't necessarily going home empty-handed. So those two teams, obviously, playoff locks. I don't see a way where either team gets left out with one game left in the season. You got Texas. Now, Texas might have been a little bit more anxious around their college football playoff aspirations before all the chaos broke loose in the SEC last week. I mean, I think there was some memo set out that was like, hey, if you are kind of on the college football playoff bubble as an SEC team, go ahead and drop your game this week. Alabama and Ole Miss did so accordingly. So Texas, even if they lose to A&M, I think still is a lock for the college football playoff. Now, if they beat A&M, they're even more a lock, and I think they feel better about their seeding for the college football playoff and would play Georgia in Atlanta. So, I mean, if they beat Georgia in Atlanta, then we're talking about Texas having to bye in the first round of the college football playoff. But regardless, Texas, for my money, locks Vegas. Now, speaking of locks Vegas, the Georgia Bulldogs, even if they lose to Georgia Tech, they will be in the SEC title game, and Georgia, I think, should feel more than confident about their chances to be in the college football playoff. Now, again, I don't expect Georgia to lose to Georgia Tech, just so we're on the same page there. But Georgia, kind of boring. I think the interesting thing about Georgia in this discussion around the college football playoff is what happens when you get them into a one-game season kind of mode. I don't know if we're there yet, but come that game in Atlanta, I think you kind of have that vibe to you if you're Kirby Smart. Definitely let's get to the college football playoff. It's a one-game season for everyone. We've seen now Kirby Smart in multiple spots this year. Post-Bama loss, post-Ole Miss loss. What do? They bounce back in a big way. Lose to Bama, go on a couple weeks later, beat the brakes off Texas at Texas. Lose to Ole Miss in convincing fashion, mind you. Circle the wagons, go play Tennessee in Athens, and make a statement there. So I'm just saying now, the one-game season kind of feel the sense of urgency that Georgia has behind them. Whenever they get into that spot, they're dangerous. So in my mind now, if you're going back to that whole drafting conversation, if you're going to draft first-round opponents, maybe you take an Arizona State first. I think Georgia would be the last one off the board if it were me. Maybe excluding an Ohio State or an Oregon, but I think they're definitely in that conversation. Now, Penn State, they're probably a lock for the college football playoff. I believe they play Maryland this week. It's no disrespect to Maryland. I just don't think that'll be much of a game. Caden Smith last night, he and I were in here watching the rankings, and he brought up a good point. Are these rankings or are these standings? Because if they're rankings, then we as a group of the college football playoff committee can use our eyeballs and see Penn State have a very, very much so too close for comfort kind of game with Minnesota, a game that I would say is probably too close for comfort against Wisconsin, a game against USC that did not really age all that great in terms of them going to overtime. Like, I'm looking at Penn State and I'm like, all right, man, like, Are they a team that will probably be in the college football playoff based on resume? Yeah, but where are you going to seed them? Because the college football playoff last night had them ranked 4th. I don't think Penn State's the 4th best team in America, but I do think that their ranking is appropriate. So kind of a interesting give and take there. I'm very curious to see what they do come Selection Sunday with Penn State, because this committee keeps on telling us how much they care about the eye test outside of what Penn State is. So not a major qualm, if you will, but I do think Penn State and their status on Selection Sunday, not being a Big Ten championship kind of team, just kind of curious. Last team here in the locks category for the penthouse, Tennessee, Notre Dame. Get to y'all in a second, all right? Last team in the penthouse for us is Indiana. Indiana plays Purdue in the Old Oaken Bucket this weekend. The Old Oaken Bucket this weekend. And, I think we know what Indiana is. Like, we saw them play Ohio State. We saw them get ragdolled by Ohio State in Columbus. And a lot of folks, I think, were very quick to say, all right, Indiana, man, they don't have the juice. They're not – are we sure they're a college football playoff team? Fair question. Again, the SEC kind of cannibalized itself, and now Indiana should feel great about their chances, why they're in the penthouse for us this week. But just because Indiana's not going to win the national championship doesn't mean we shouldn't give them their flowers. Like, Curt Cignetti took over an operation that took over the job at Indiana, not because the coach at Indiana before him was just knocking it out of the park. Indiana won 3 games last year. Indiana won 1 conference game last year. They got ragdolled by a team that's considered by most to be the best roster in college football. So, like, Indiana, in a lot of ways, would you have liked to put a better foot forward? Yeah. Was Indiana ever really considered a national title contending team? I don't think so. And I could be wrong on that as this thing progresses, but I'd be shocked if Indiana's there at the end and playing for a national title or anywhere in that conversation. Love Curt Cignetti, love Indiana, but that's just how I feel about it. So put them in the penthouse. They'll make the playoff, but what they do when they get there, I have my reservations. Now, in the lobby, these are the teams. Excuse me, I get choked up talking about it. Gets us emotional this time of year. The lobby portion of Hotel Playoff for this week's segment is teams that I would say control their own destiny. Now, Tennessee and Notre Dame are 1A and 1B right there. Tennessee, you beat Vandy. You're a double-digit point favorite. Got to go to Nashville now. Short little car ride. You got an 11 a.m. local kick. Kind of sleepy. Diego Pavia ruins seasons. That's what he does. Handle business. You're in the playoff. You should win this football game. The curious thing about Tennessee now is, what do they look like when they get there? Maybe more importantly, what does Nico Iamaleava look like when he gets there? And I want to see him put on a show against Vandy. And I say put on a show, I would settle for like a couple of big pass completions down the field. Because what he is versus SEC opponents and what he is versus non-conference opponents, 2 very different discussions. And so I'd like to see him do it against an SEC team. I understand Vandy and the logo, people still have, I think, a hard time getting on board with them being a good football team. Vandy's a good team. Ask Bama, ask Texas. Like, Vandy's a good football team. So if I'm Tennessee, can we kind of rev the engine this weekend? I think you'll make the college football playoff just winning that game, but you feel a lot better about your chances once you get to the college football playoff if Nico goes, call it 22 for 28, 279, 3 touchdowns. A couple of those are bombs. I think that's the way you'd like to live your life. Curious to watch that. Now, as I mentioned Notre Dame, the good folks over on our Notre Dame on 3 message board, blueandgold.com, they have been just at my head for the better part of the last 24 hours, and I appreciate them for it. A lot of passion out there in South Bend. The frustration for them is like, hey, why are we not ranked higher in your rankings, JD? Why are we? I mean, the College Football Playoff Committee's got us at 5. Why are we darn near towards the back end of like number 8, number 9 in your rankings? I have my reservations about Notre Dame. I've made that very clear. I like Riley Leonard as a quarterback. I don't know if I love him for what this offense needs to win a national championship. He has yet to throw over 250 yards in any game this season. He's gone over 200 yards a handful of times. If Notre Dame gets into a shootout, I don't know if I feel amazing about them. I give that preface to say Notre Dame is still one of the best teams in college football right now. Like, the NIU loss gets them dunked on social media, and it's a reason, quite frankly, why I have them where I have them in my own personal rankings. But Notre Dame also still beat A&M at A&M. Now, it wasn't Marcel Reed playing quarterback, but I think that win should still count for something. Notre Dame also has left 0 room for any conversation around them being in the college football playoff to this point. Like, they have the number 1 margin of victory in college football, 27 points a game. They're beating the britches off people, man. So if Notre Dame beats USC at USC this weekend, they're in the dance, and I think they deserve to be in the dance, just so we're aligned there. So Tennessee, Notre Dame could definitely both be in the penthouse conversation. I don't feel as confident as putting them as locks by nature of who they have this last game of the season. But just so we're aligned, we feel great about both those teams, think they'll both be in the playoff, think they both win their games this weekend. Now, the ACC gets very, very interesting. Miami and SMU. I would expect that to be our ACC title game. Clemson could sneak in there if Miami loses to Syracuse this upcoming weekend. SMU has already punched their ticket to the ACC title game. Miami, again, has got one game of work to do. Both teams obviously control their own destiny for the college football playoff. If you win the ACC, you're in the dance with the first round bye. The thing with Miami I want to talk through first, and I said this last night, I said it on a previous video, if Miami gets into that field of 12, assuming Boise State is there as well, you can make a very strong case for Ashton Jeanty being the best player in that bracket. I think I'd lean towards Cam Ward being the best player in the whole college football playoff. To put it a step further, I think Cam Ward is the most impactful player in that entire college football playoff field for Miami. Because would Miami, I said this yesterday, would they be a team that you favor on a neutral site against, call it a Georgia? I happen to believe Georgia would be somewhere in the range of a one-score favorite, if not more. But if I'm Cam Ward, I'm saying just get me in the door. Get me on the field with somebody else for 4 quarters. Let me do what I do. And if you're Miami, you got a chance. We've seen Miami and their horsepower when they put it together. Now, the frustrating thing is you've only seen Miami put it together with a little bit of a sense of urgency outside of that Florida game. Like, a lot of the times you see Miami put it together when they are messing with their food for the first half against somebody, or they're down after the first half against somebody. The Cal game comes to mind. The Va-Tech game comes to mind. The Duke game, heck, comes to mind. Like, if Miami can actually put it all together for 4 quarters, they're going to be a threat. Going to be a very, very massive threat. So all I'll say, the Cam Ward effect is very, very real. Now, SMU is interesting to talk through. Again, they win the ACC. They're in. There's no discussion about it. Here's the curious part to me about SMU. So last night, the rankings come out. SMU is ranked 9th. They are seeded 10th. In reality, the 9th seed doesn't actually have all that much cushion as much as it sounds. You're saying, wait, ranked 9th, there's 12 teams. You got a 3-spot cushion. Well, not actually. In my mind, you have a 1-spot cushion because 10 is Indiana. Okay, got it. 11 is Boise State. Boise State is, by most people's projections, going to be the G5 rep for the college football playoff. That 12th ranked team is Clemson. Clemson, in this discussion, is out of the college football playoff if it started tomorrow. Why? Because the Big 12 champ, projected to be the highest-ranked Big 12 team, is Arizona State at 16. So they would move up to that 12th seed. So the way that I'm looking at this thing, I'm not a math guy, but when I look at the numbers here, SMU only has a 1-spot cushion. Now, if they win this weekend, how much more do they climb up? Maybe a spot? I mean, maybe if the committee's kind of feeling generous, they get some chaos in front of them, maybe 2 spots. If I'm SMU, I don't want to leave it to chance for us to get to that ACC title game. If we get beat, I don't know if you get in. So we'll see what happens there. The Clemson story arc there is kind of interesting as well. We'll talk about that in a second. But SMU, curious, very, very curious to see what happens with them, especially after this weekend. Now, after this weekend, too, is a massive thing you're talking about if you're A&M. Because A&M, don't look now, even after the loss to Auburn, they control their own destiny. Like A&M and their record looks like a record that should be in the need a reservation category. Y'all, I mean, if they beat Texas, punch their ticket to Atlanta, you're 4 quarters away from punching your ticket to the college football playoff. And again, if you're A&M, I think it's not wild to assume they could be a 3-loss team with wins over Texas and Georgia as an SEC champion. I think Texas A&M would get a bye in the first round of the college football playoff. Forget the fact they're ranked 20 last night. I think they would ascend up those rankings and find themselves as one of the highest, or 4 highest ranked rather, conference champions. So again, we'll see what they are, but you feel good about your chances if you're A&M because of the fact that you control your own destiny and because of the fact that you got Texas at home. We'll see. All I'll say is we'll see. Now, quick plug here. The Hard Count brought to you by Prize Picks. Code HardCount, $50 in lineups when you play $5 in promo funds. Again, code HardCount, prizepicks.com. I mention this now because in the Texas A&M game, there's a square I love. Marcel Reed, 179.5 pass yards. We'll take the more there. Coming off a big game against Auburn, I think they will come out swinging. I think they will probably have to throw the football to beat Texas. Expect Marcel Reed to hit the more on that square. Again, code HardCount, $5 in lineups, $50 in promo funds. I think PrizePicks also got a little free square action for the boys this weekend. Tyreek Hill, half a receiving yard. So get in on that. Use the Marcel Reed square as well, and we'll be in business. So 2 more teams to talk about here. I want to talk about them together in the lobby. Arizona State and Iowa State. The Big 12 is madness. It's absolutely madness. And we will unpack the madness together at the end of this show. Caden Smith and I sat down and just did like essentially Algebra 2 all the way through all these different scenarios, and he broke it down, and it is something else. So drink your caffeine if you are watching this live. Arizona State and Iowa State, for simplicity's sake, are the favorites to play in the Big 12 championship game. We'll put that right there. So if you're Arizona State or Iowa State, win your conference, you're in the dance. How many times have I said you're in the dance this segment? I don't know, but the point remains the same. So ASU and Iowa State, they're still in that college football playoff conversation. They're still in the lobby by nature of them. Controlling their own destiny is a funny way to put it, but like generously speaking, control their own destiny to a degree. All right, so this is the part of the conversation that gets really juicy. We got need a reservation. And by what the ranking said last night, man, whether you are in agreement or you couldn't disagree more, these are the rankings. You got Clemson at 12 and Bama at 13. Now, Clemson has the luxury of playing a top 15 South Carolina this weekend. So if Clemson is able to beat, let's just say they convincingly beat South Carolina at home. We don't have that happening, hand up. But if they do that, think about the juice that would be for that operation out there and what that would mean for them when it comes to their potential to jump into that top 11. Because they're 12 right now. They would be bumped out because of the conference champion projected from the Big 12 being below that top 12. But, like, there's a path there for Clemson. I think you're rooting for a Notre Dame loss. I don't think you would hate it if Alabama lost as well and kind of got you some buffer behind you as well. All I'm saying now, there is a path. There is very much so a path, and you are rooting hard for anybody and everybody ahead of you to lose. So that's probably the most makeable path. Alabama, I mentioned them being behind Clemson at 13. They don't have the same juicy opponent this weekend from a ranking perspective in South Carolina, but Alabama plays Auburn. Auburn now probably helped themselves a little bit in the eyes of the committee. You would have to believe as an opponent for Alabama beating A&M this past weekend. At the end of the day now, Alabama sitting at 13. Convincing win over Auburn. Kind of what we said for Clemson. Root for madness ahead of you. You should feel okay about your chances to get in. Now, from Alabama, I'm also rooting pretty hard for South Carolina. And South Carolina is also in this need a reservation category. South Carolina was ranked 15 last night, and they have the luxury, same thing with Clemson, playing a ranked opponent. They play a team that is ranked in that top 12. So if South Carolina can go out there and blow the doors off of Clemson, and if Bama could lose, a lot of ifs, a lot of potentials. If Bama could lose, Notre Dame could lose, Tennessee could lose. Like if they get some wiggle room, they could backdoor their way into this thing. So I think the backdoor main suspects are Clemson, Bama, South Carolina. Those are the ones that I'm watching most closely. Ole Miss, I think you have to put them in this discussion just because of the fact that they also have 3 losses. They also have the head-to-head over a South Carolina. They're ranked a spot ahead of South Carolina, a spot behind Alabama at 14. So Ole Miss, they're in the discussion. I'd be surprised if they had a ton of luck jumping anybody because of the fact they play Mississippi State this weekend. No knock on the Fighting Jeff Levy's, just not quite as much excitement as maybe a South Carolina or a Clemson would for those two opponents. Keep an eye on Ole Miss, but we'll mention them right now. And then the Big 12, again, it's madness. BYU and Colorado are two of the teams that are in contention for the Big 12 championship. They have a 6-2 record in the conference right now, which is tied with Arizona State and Iowa State. However, the tiebreakers work in such a way to where that wouldn't necessarily benefit them if it came down to just tiebreakers alone. The scenario that's most digestible, if you will, is if you get a Iowa State and Arizona State lost this weekend, BYU and Colorado, I believe, would then be your two teams that would play in Jerry World for the Big 12 championship. Kato, I'm good on that? We're right on that? Okay, we got a thumbs up. That's good news. Okay, so that segment's going to be madness later. But just, okay, we'll say that. If you're a Colorado fan or a BYU fan, root for those teams ahead of you to lose, and we'll unpack those scenarios a little bit later. So that's all the teams need a reservation. Here's the teams in the G5 party. And it went from like a party. It was raging early on in the year. You had Army in there. You had Navy in there. Vibes were immaculate. It is now a 3-team kickback. So Waka Flocka was throwing the Grove Street party early on. It's now Waka Flocka's little get-together. Boise State, look around you, baby. Nobody to your left. Nobody to your right. Sprint through the finish line. Ashton Jeanty, help yourself with the Heisman Trophy a little bit there and try and boost yourself with the votes a little bit in that regard. If Boise State wins the Mountain West, by nature of what this committee is telling us, with Boise State being at 11 last night, you will not just make the college football playoff, But thank the Big 12, you'll get a bye in the first round of the college football playoff. Now, you'll end up playing more than likely the 5 seed, which could be the Big 10 runner-up. But if you're Boise State, handle business, probably have to beat UNLV in your conference championship to get that bye. But that's also another thing that I think benefits Boise State here. They're not playing like Joe Schmo University in the Mountain West Conference Championship. They're playing a ranked UNLV team. Now, that's the other conversation here. What if UNLV finds their way into the Mountain West Conference Championship? Say they beat Boise State. Do they have a case here? Do they have a case to catapult themselves in? And then that third team here, it's in the conversation of the kickback, like Boise State, UNLV having a good time. They're on the aux. They're having appetizers. They're having libations. Tulane is kind of just back there on the corner. And it's that meme you see on social media a lot where it's the guy against the corner with the thought bubble of, they don't know I can make the college football playoff. Like that is Tulane right now. Up against the wall, just watching it all happen. They don't know I can make the college football playoff. It would take some madness. It would take something wacky. But Tulane now, do not count them out. If they win their conference, they could potentially, with the right amount of bizarre going on, be the highest-ranked G5 champ. So Boise State, UNLV, hanging out in the G5 kickback. Rest in peace to the G5 party. So to recap it here, in hotel playoff, in the penthouse, your teams that, barring something wildly unforeseen, are more or less locks in my mind. Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Penn State, and Indiana both have games that matter this weekend. I'd be surprised if they lost. I'd be surprised if either way they were left out of the college football playoff. You talk about the lobby, man. Tennessee, Notre Dame, Miami, SMU, A&M controlling their own destiny. Arizona State and Iowa State all just hanging out there, having a good time. And I think most of them, if not all of them, control their own destiny for the college football playoff. Tennessee and Notre Dame especially, obviously the two ACC teams. A&M controls their own destiny, and the Big 12 is madness. We'll talk about that later. Who needs a reservation right now? You got Clemson, Bama, BYU, Colorado, and Ole Miss. South Carolina also needs a reservation. They are invisible on the graphic, but I promise you they're there. G5 party, Boise State, UNLV, Tulane, all hanging out with Waka Flocka and a good old G5 kickback. So a lot of teams still in it now. I feel like I need to be just transparent and say this every single show whenever we discuss the new format. Whenever I say anything positive about the new format, I feel like obligated to just say, hey, I was against this, because I was, and quite frankly, if we were still at 4, I'll be down for 4. If we went to 6, I would have been down for 6. But I do appreciate what the 12-team playoff is in regards to what conference realignment and the transfer portal has brought us. If we didn't have the realignment tectonic plates in Texas in the Big 12 and you got no new teams in the Big 10, like, okay, I'd have a harder time getting on board with it. But I think this season has cooked itself up perfectly to be a great exhibit A as to why the 12-team playoff has been a lot of fun this year. Okay, so again, I'm still pro 4-team, but I'm not going to be the guy now that's walking off the college football landscape plank and saying, I'm done with this, I'm out of here. No, 12-team playoff's been great, and I'm excited to watch how it formulates the rest of the regular season. Last thing I'll say, Texas and Texas A&M for a spot in Atlanta, poetry. Absolute poetry.